We're trying to get through 1 Samuel 3 today. There's a lot of ground to cover, and I just want to kind of hop, skip, and jump along the top of this. There might be some things we dig down a little bit into as we finish this section. Judges 8, we're finishing up the story of Gideon. Gideon, I think, is one of the favorites. I remember one time when I was a kid in Sunday school, we took clay pots and went outside and broke them with hammers and shouted and danced around in circles. And that is the best memory I have of Gideon. And so Gideon is a well-known guy, but he was a failure at the end of his life. Like many people in the Bible, including Noah, Gideon was a failure. You see what he does towards the end of his life. He subdues the Midianites in chapter 8. One of the most, just a couple intriguing points here at the beginning. I notice in chapter 8, verse 1, that it says that once the fight was over, something happened. You have these people coming out and saying, hey, you should have called us and we would have fought with you. It says, now the men of Ephraim said to him, why have you done this to us by not calling us when you went to fight with Midian? And they reprimanded him sharply. It's amazing to me that once the fighting's done, all the cowards come out and claim the victory, right? So that is exactly what's going on in chapter 8. You have also a request. Let's just skip down. How about this? We go to verse 22. It happens that men of Israel said to Gideon, rule over us, both you and your son and your grandson, for you have delivered us. But Gideon said, I will not, for the Lord shall rule over you. And then immediately following that, what he does is gets involved in idolatry. Look at verse 27. Gideon made into an ephod and set it up in his city, Ophrah. And all Israel played the harlot with it there, and it became a snare to Gideon in his house. His idolatry became a snare to him in his house. But notice he refused to reign over them. That is important because if you go to the next chapter, Abimelech is the son of Jerubbaal, and Jerubbaal is another name for Gideon. I don't know if you knew that. So this is Gideon's son, Abimelech. And Abimelech, which means my father is king, that's what that name means. Notice what he does. He is a man who decides to go and kill all of his brothers in order that he might be king. In fact, John Murphy and I have been talking about sowing and reaping through the Bible. Here's another great example of sowing and reaping. I want you to notice what happens in verse 22. After Abimelech had reigned over Israel for 3 years, God sent a spirit of ill will between Abimelech and the men of Shechem, and the men of Shechem dealt treacherously with Abimelech. So Abimelech dealt treacherously with his brothers, and then God allows these men to turn around and deal treacherously with him, and there's ambush set up, and all kinds of stuff goes on, and we're going to keep skipping through all that. Let's go all the way down to verse 56 of chapter 9. It says, thus God repaid the wickedness of Abimelech, which he had done to his father by killing his 70 brothers, and all the evil of the men of Shechem God returned to their own heads, and on them came the curse of Jotham, the son of Jerubbaal. So there is a sowing and reaping principle at work here. One of the things you have to remember about Judges is that all the people are bad. It's all of them. I mean, nobody's good. There's not anybody in here who you can say, this is somebody we ought to be like. Even Samson, even Gideon, these are not good people. They serve the Lord, they serve the Lord well, but you realize they have flaws in them. They have very serious flaws. And we'll talk about some more of those in just a second. Okay, chapter 11. I guess we could talk a little bit about chapter 10. We have Tola, Jair, and then we have Israel oppressed again. Chapter 11. Very challenging story here. We have the story of Jephthah. Now, Jephthah is described as a mighty man of valor, yet he had a checkered lineage because he was born of a harlot or a prostitute. So he's kicked out of his house, and they told him to leave. And so the people of Ammon, they come to fight against the nation of Israel. And so what do the people do? They go to Jephthah, and what do they say to him? Verse 6. Come and be our commander that we may fight against the people. So once again, once the going gets tough, the people come out and say, we need somebody to lead us. They got rid of him when they didn't like him, but then they need him, they want him. So they get him, and he says, he has there's actually a parallel here in verse 7 to the way the people have treated the Lord. Notice what he says. Did you not hate me and expel me from my father's house? Why have you come to me now in your time of distress? What's the cycle in Judges? Sin, servitude, supplication, salvation. And Drew added another one, silence. I never heard that one before. There's a time of peace. But yeah, so sin, servitude, supplication, salvation. So what he's saying is, when everything's going good, you don't want me, but now when it's bad, you want me. That's exactly how God feels, if you can put it that way. So he's a example of that. Then we have him going out, and they go to fight, and Jephthah goes to fight against the people. How does he, his message to them recounts God's work for Israel. That's verse 14 and following. And then the Spirit of the Lord comes upon Jephthah, verse 29, and he accomplishes these great things, but then he makes a very foolish vow. Look at verse 30. This is a very challenging portion of Scripture. Verse 30. We have how many of you have heard of Jephthah's vow before? Okay, about half of you. That's good. It says, if you will indeed deliver the people of Ammon into my hands. Now, right there's a problem. Because God has promised delivery, and he's already doubting. He's already almost bribing God in a sense. That's the way I guess you could frame it. He's not, God, of course, God is not bribed. You don't understand what I'm saying. What I mean is that he is showing his lack of faith by doing this. Look at verse 31. That it will be that whatever comes out of the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the people of Ammon shall surely be the Lord's, and I will offer it up as a burnt offering. So he has advance, he has victory, and then look what happens. We have this great tragedy that happens in verse 34. Jephthah came to the house of Mizpah, and there was his daughter coming out to meet him with timbrels and dancing, and she was his only child. Besides her, he had neither son nor daughter, and it came to pass when he saw her, he tore his clothes and said, alas, my daughter, you have brought me very low. You are among those who trouble me, for I have given my word to the Lord, and I cannot go back on it. Now let me explain. There are a couple of explanations, a couple of theories about what exactly is going on here, and then we can talk about it if you want. The first theory is this. If you read the vow of Jephthah, when it says, whatever shall be that comes out to the doors of my house to meet me, I will return in peace. If I return in peace from the people of Ammon, shall surely be the Lord's. That means that it is dedicated to the Lord. This will be completely given to God. And the word and is called a vav or a wow. There's a possibility that could either be an or an and. It's either saying that this will be dedicated to the Lord and it will be offered up as a burnt offering, or it could be saying it'll be dedicated to the Lord, or if it's an animal, it'll be offered up as a burnt offering. That's the explanation. Now, there is a lot of disagreement. There's a lot of discussion about this because what happens is that he keeps his vow. The Bible does not say he kills his daughter. Look down at verse 38. Or actually go back to verse 37. She said to her father, let this thing be done for me. Let me alone for 2 months that I may go and wander on the mountains and bewail my virginity, my friends and I. He said, go, and she sent her away for 2 months. She went away and bewailed her virginity in the mountains. So she's the only daughter. This cuts off his line forever. He will have no children. She is a virgin daughter of his, and if he dedicates her to the Lord, that means she will never belong to a man in that sense. And obviously, if he was involved in some sort of person sacrifice, she would be killed. Okay? And he carried out, and then all it says in verse 39, at the end of the 2 months, that she returned to her father, and he carried out his vow for her, which he had vowed. And then it emphasizes the fact that she had known no man, or she knew no man. So again, I say there are two options here. Neither one of them is very great. This is a rash vow. This is an unfortunate vow. But that is, I don't know if you're reading this, if you had any questions or any thoughts about that. But that's the basic breakdown of this discussion, of this. And I'm curious if any of you have any other thoughts on that or any other maybe insight into that.
When it says he carried out his vow, does it mean he killed her?
You know, that's the question. The question is, when he carried out his vow, does it mean he killed her? And the question is, we don't know the answer. It depends on the meaning of the vow back in verse 31. If it means that he dedicates her to the Lord or he kills it, it would be an animal. So how would you dedicate a bull to the Lord who comes out? If you come to your house and there's an animal coming out to you, how would you dedicate it to God? It doesn't know how to be dedicated to the Lord. You would give it up in an offering. If it's a person, the indication is that would be given up as dedicated as in temple service or in something. Yes?
This entire situation reminds me of, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this correct, but the Walton oral legend. Basically, there was this young boy, a son of the Lord, who ignored the Sabbath and
Yeah.
not in church, and instead he was fishing.
Okay.
And then when he caught his fish, it was actually a worm. In other words, a serpent dragon.
Okay.
And then what happened? He was so frightened by it, he tossed the worm into a well,
Okay.
and from then on repented. Went to the Crusades after
Yeah.
He came back, and he generally made like a deal with God, and God gave him advice on how to defeat it. But yet he said, when you have defeated the worm, the first creature that comes up, first person or animal generally that comes up and congratulates you, you have to kill it.
Mm-hmm.
That might not have been God, but
Right.
similar, like this person getting
Yeah, it sounds very similar to Jephthah's vow, yeah.
right. Anyway, what happened is Abias, the guy followed it, killed the worm, and then his father ran up
Yeah.
and there killed his father, killed one of his dogs, and afterwards like that.
Yeah, there you can see the Jephthah's vow is a very challenging thing. I don't honestly. I mean I prefer to read it as there's the option of the or, but I honestly don't. I'm not an expert. I do not know the answer to that question. Yes, John.
I think the clue is in verse 37, where if she was going to die in 2 months, why is she worried about her virginity?
Yeah, and that's a good question. There's a very vast cultural difference between our culture and theirs, and so it would not be out of the ordinary for them to bemoan the fact that she would never have children. It's more like along the lines of her never having carried along her line and never having children. I'm not saying that it's black and white. I mean, God definitely speaks against child sacrifice. He definitely speaks against human sacrifice. But let me tell you, the book of Judges, I mean, there's all kinds of bad stuff that's going on there. I would not surprise me, frankly, if Jephthah was engaged in something this atrocious. That's the only reason I'm not being like, you have to believe it's this dedication to the Lord or nothing else. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Did he have to fulfill his vow since he waited to the Lord, or could he ever fulfill his vow?
That's a good question. The biblical pattern is when you make a vow to God, you keep that vow. Now, what if you make a vow of something sinful? I don't know. I don't know if we have enough time for that tonight, to be completely honest. But the biblical pattern is you make a vow to God is a very serious thing. There's a whole thing in Deuteronomy about if you make a vow, and even if a wife makes a vow and her husband hears it, and it's a rash vow, he can almost cancel the vow or veto the vow. There's all kinds of rules about vows. They take it very seriously. Yes, sir.
Hindsight's always 20/20. So it was stupid to do this in the first place. But if you were truly honorable, I think it's saying, then take it out on me.
Yeah. Oh, okay, yes. And notice how he treats her. Notice, I emphasize it. I don't know if you heard it, but in verse 35, who does he blame? He says, you have brought me very low. You are among those who trouble me, for I have given my word to the Lord, and I cannot go back. So rather than, he blames someone else for this. And so, again, there's a lot of weakness in Jephthah. Let's keep going. I don't want to get too caught up in this. We also have the classic, you ever heard somebody say a shibboleth? This is a shibboleth. It's used as a term that means a key identifier that distinguishes two groups. This is where that comes from in chapter 12. We have the two people, the Gileads and the Ephraimites. They have a different way of saying the Hebrew. I think it's the T sound in Hebrew. So it's either shibboleth or sibboleth, or I guess it's a seen or a sheen. The way they say that letter determined where they were from. And so they could tell whether someone was from somewhere else. It's just a dialect thing. So that's, in case you've heard someone say that, that's where it comes from. Talk a little bit about Samson, if you don't mind. Samson starts in chapter 13. We have the story of Samson. I really just want to kind of focus on one main thing with Samson, and that is his greatest weakness is his eyes. His greatest weakness is his eyes, his lust of the eyes. Follow the story. Every trouble he has, he sees and he pursues, right? He looks upon things and he pursues them. And everything from the woman to the prostitute to seeing the honey and taking it out of the line, he disregards all of his vows. And there is just an emphasis there on seeing. It's chapter 14. He went to Timnah and he saw a woman. And he said, I have seen a woman of Timnah of the daughters of the Philistines. Now therefore get her for me as a wife. Because, go down to verse 3, she pleases me well. This idea of the pleasing to the sight. Everything is about his eyes. Everything is about his sight. And he is, of course, dealt with treacherously as his first wife is given to his best man. We see that at the end of chapter 14. Then he takes revenge upon them. Let's go to chapter 16. He saw a harlot there, and went to her, and then he goes and meets with a woman who he loved named Delilah, and most of you know about Samson and Delilah. They tell her to entice him and find out where his great strength comes from. Here's an interesting thought experiment. What did Samson look like? There's a lot of thoughts out there that Samson is a big, burly guy. I kind of wonder if he was actually kind of skinny, because they're so confused over where his strength comes from. I mean, if he was a big, enormous guy, then he's walking around, you'd say, well, obviously he's just really strong. But Samson has unusual strength, spirit-empowered strength, and I personally think that maybe it had something to do with the fact that he did not look incredibly strong, but the Bible doesn't tell us about that. But anyway, he definitely was strong. He carried the gates on his shoulders and did things like that. So they ask, seduce him. That happens 3 times. She finally, in fact, I think it's kind of funny. Go to verse 15 of chapter 15. She, after the 3rd time, where she, does all these things, she ties him up with bowstrings, she does all these things. And she said to him, how can you say I love you when your heart is not with me? You have mocked me these 3 times and have not told me where your great strength lies. How can you say I love you? Like what? Like who's saying that to whom? She's trying to kill him. And anyway, look at what happens in verse 21. A great little bit of justice there. It says that the Philistines took him and did what? Put out his eyes. So his great flaw, his eyes, are taken out by the Philistines, and they turn him into a beast. They turn him into a beast of labor. And he is in the prison in the grinder, which means he's grinding meal with a big stone. He's acting like a donkey. Okay, he's made into a donkey. Literally, he's made like an animal. Then there is this great feast happens at the end where the Philistines are having a feast. They say, call to Samson, he may perform for us. They want to make a mockery of him. And so Samson is led, and then Samson says, verse 28, he called to the Lord. I don't know this. I think this is right. I think this is the first time the Bible says Samson called to the Lord. Isn't that sad? He finally calls to the Lord when he's bitter, angry, he's on his own, he has no eyesight, it's at the end of his life. Okay, this is not this picture of a man that you want to follow. Remember me, I pray. He says, strengthen me, I pray just this once, O God, that I may with one blow take vengeance on the Philistines for what? For my eyes. He's angry because they put out his eyes. Okay. God grants his wish, and he dies with the Philistines. And so the dead, it says in verse 30, that the dead that he killed at his death were more than the dead that he killed in his living. So we have all the stories of all of the judges that end with Samson. And then chapter 17 through chapter 21 of Judges are 3 chapters that are really disturbing. You have a lot going on in these chapters. In fact, a lot of people think that, because we stop really dealing with Judges at chapter 17, that is, Judges proper, the actual judges. We deal with stories about how bad things are. And we have this theme of there was no judge in Israel, everyone did what was right in his own eyes, is repeated over and over again. In fact, when Seth and I were in Hebrew class together at Bob Jones Seminary, we translated, I think it was this chapter, right? Judges 17? That was one of the first things we translated. And we talked about Micah and the idol that he made, and there's a lot of humor in this, some dark humor. Look at chapter 17. There was a man from the mountains of Ephraim, whose name was Micah. He said to his mother, the 1,100 shekels of silver that were taken from you, on which you had put a curse, even saying in my ears, here it is, the silver, with me, I took it. So he's sitting there at home. He stole money from his mom. He hears his mom curse the silver that he has in his hands, and he says, I better get rid of the silver. So he gives it back to her. He said, by the way, the silver you cursed, here it is. And his mother says, may you be blessed by the Lord. When he had returned the 1,100 shekels of silver, she said, I had actually wholly dedicated this silver from my hand to the Lord to make a carved image and a molded image. Now, therefore, I will return it to you. So he took the silver that he had stolen and returned to his mother, and they make an image out of it. They're violating the second commandment. But they do this because everyone does what's right in their own eyes. It sounded like a good idea to them, so they did it. And then there's another young man from Bethlehem, a Levite, who was staying there. And he's going, and he says, and Micah said to him, where do you come from? And he said, I am a Levite. This is verse 9 of Bethlehem. I'm on my way to find a place to stay. And Micah says, live here. We can make our own, religious community. We have an idol. What else do we need? We need a Levite who's going to perform rituals for us. And the Levite says, okay. Everyone does what's right in their own eyes. It makes no sense that they're not following. No one consults God. No one reads the Bible or, consults the law. No one goes and pursues what God would have them do. And he says, look at the end of the chapter. Why does he do this? He says, now I know that the Lord will be good to me since I have a Levite as a priest. Hey, a good luck charm, right? So you see what's going on. Everyone's doing what's right in their own eyes. There's all kinds of terrible things that go on. We won't really indulge the rest of this, but the idea is that the Danites then try to steal it, and the priest is basically saying, in fact, if you go to verse 19 of chapter 18, they say to him, they hear this priest, and they're like, what's going on here? They say to him, be quiet, put your hand over your mouth, come with us, be a father and a priest to us. Is it better for you to be a priest to the household of one man, or that you should be a priest to a household and tribe? So the priest's heart was glad, and he took the ephod and the household idols and the carved image and took his place among the people. He was a priest for hire. He decided to go to the highest bidder. He's like, I got a better church to go to, right? I'm going to leave this one house. I'm going to go and be a big-time guy. That's what this guy was doing. He's following the money. And then, of course, the Levite has a concubine who is abused, and it's just terrible, terrible stories over and over again. If you skip to the end of the chapter, keep going all the way to the end of the book, you have, at the very end of the book, I'm just going to conclude with this, chapter 21, verse 25. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. So I'm going to stop with it there. We're going to go into Ruth in just a second. But I want you to get the picture of wickedness and evil and depravity and everyone doing just carnal things, whatever was right in their own eyes. Okay, you're depressed? Are you sad? Okay, good. Because the book of Ruth is a breath of fresh air. Notice the first chapter of the book of Ruth. It says, it came to pass in the days of the judges. Okay? In the days when the judges ruled, chapter 1 of Ruth tells us we have this beautiful story of covenant faithfulness. Okay, so if we have our book themes, what is Genesis book theme? Beginnings, right? Promise. How about Exodus? Escape. Yeah, coming out, escape. Or wandering. How about Leviticus? Holiness, good. Numbers. Leadership. How about Deuteronomy? Covenant, very good. How about Joshua? Conquest of the land, right? They're going in and taking the land. How about Judges? Judgment and salvation is what I had. Judgment and salvation. You have the spiral down and God saving them. If you had Ruth, a covenant love. Covenant love is the key word. In fact, the word covenant love, or chesed, which I mentioned earlier, reappears over and over again. You have basically 4 movements in this story. It begins in chapter 1 with Ruth abandoning her home. Well, of course, she gets married, and her husband dies, and her father-in-law dies, and it's just her sister-in-law, and her mother-in-law. And her mother-in-law says, look, I've lost everything. I'm going to go back to my homeland. And Ruth says, look, your people are my people. Your God is my God. I will go with you. I'll be faithful in covenant love to you. I will show covenant love to you by being faithful to you. And Naomi, her mother-in-law, says, look, you're still attractive. You're still young. Go and find yourself a young man who can be your husband, and you can raise up sons. And she says, no, I will follow you because I've made a commitment to this family. So she goes, she meets Boaz in the field. Boaz is a redeemer or kinsman of the family. So then she goes to him at night and proposes to him. How's that, ladies? What is it? What's the one day of the year? Is it April? What's the day that you can go propose to your husband? Yeah, okay. So that's what she did, basically, at the threshing floor. She went and she made a proposal. One note about that, nothing indecent happened on the threshing floor. There was nothing indecent about that. However, it was a lot of tension. There's a lot of tension in that moment where she goes, it's kind of humorous, where it says that he woke up and at his feet there was a woman. He turns and he's like, what is going on here? Why is there a woman here? And so there's a lot of words in there that indicate there's a little bit of a love tension going on there, that she is very attracted to him. He is very attracted to her. They're trying to be proper people, and they're going to do this the proper way. And so he goes and he redeems her publicly. There is another person in the way, and he clears that out of the way by indicating that there's some land, and this guy's only interested in land. And then he says, okay, if you have this land, you have to take this woman too. He says, no, I don't want anything to do with it. So Boaz says, I will claim this woman. And then, they are fruitful. And think about this. How long was Ruth married to her first husband? Whose name was Sickly. How would you like to have a name like Sickly? You're born and your mom says, yeah, I'll name this guy Sickly. That was his name, right? Mahon and Kilion, the two brothers. Okay, Ruth's husband, how long was she married to him before did they have any children? No. How long were they married? 10 years, no children. No birth control either. Okay? So, infertility, possibly, she thinks. I don't know. But now she has a husband. She has no promise of knowing she's going to have kids. She has a child. And when she has a child, there's great rejoicing. And of course, we know that from that line comes who? King David, right? King David comes from this line. If you look at the very end of the book of Ruth, it says that Salmon begot Boaz, Boaz begot Obed, Obed begot Jesse, and Jesse begot Ruth. So this is the line here. As we've, in fact, let me just stop there. Any questions about this? We don't really have time to get in 1 Samuel. Really, 1, 2, and 3 is all about the last judge, Samuel, who hears from the Lord. Yes, sir?
Do we know when Judge was judging
No.
Israel all the time? Okay.
No. We don't know what judge was judging during the time of this. I don't think. You know?
Actually, we aren't sure which judges judged when, because the book of Judges is not necessarily chronological.
Right.
And there's even thought that maybe the judges were very local, because the tribes were still very tribal at that
Right.
point. So you could have had one operating up, northern and one in the south, kind of coinciding. So most of it's kind of guesswork.
Yeah. It doesn't say. But yeah, I agree with Seth. That it's probably, the judges may not have judged the entire, think about also how travel was limited. Think about the totally different mindset, totally different culture at that time. Ruth is a terrific book, by the way. Yes, sir.
Infertility and the plea for a son is a repeated.
It is.
Is there a pattern to that theme?
Absolutely. There absolutely is a pattern to the theme of infertility and a cry for a son. You have that from Sarah and Abraham to Ruth. Absolutely. You have it in stories from, I'm trying to think, there was one other one. Oh, Hannah. In Samuel. She's infertile. And you have Rachel and Leah. One, God opens her womb. There's the theme of promise from the very beginning of Genesis that there's a Messiah coming, and the seed promise of one from the woman's seed will crush the head of the serpent. Okay, that starts at the very beginning, and this theme is running through. So that's part of the reason why someone would mourn for their virginity. It's this idea of, oh, it's not our family. Our family is gone. Okay, and that carries a lot of weight in this ancient world. Now, it carries a lot of weight today too, but just amplify that to the ancient world. It was considered shameful to be barren. Today, there's a lot of support, there's a lot of encouragement for people who are barren. In that culture, if you were barren, it was almost like you're worthless. Like, what good are you? So there's a lot of pain associated with that. Yes, sir?
One of the promises that God gives to the nation of Israel, if they follow Him,
Right.
is fruitful womb,
Right.
children. And so they kind of, it's very possible they took it as, well, if you aren't having children, clearly
God isn't blessing you.
God
No.
is not blessing you. In fact, God's judging.
Right. Now we know that's not the case. We know God did not judge like he had Rachel. He did not judge Rachel. I don't believe that wasn't part of her judgment. And Hannah, for sure, she was a godly woman. He wasn't judging her. That he shows his, but that you're right. That there is a lot in the Bible about you'll be blessed and in bearing. Your stars in the sea and stars of the sky and the sand of the sea. Your children will be more multiplied than that. We've gone a little bit over. Thank you for your attention. This is so much fun. I really enjoy this. I hope you're getting nuggets here and there. My goal for you is to have hooks you can hang your hat on as you read the Bible, as you hear about judges, as you hear about Samson. You think of Samson, you think, oh, that's before King David. That's after Moses. Okay, okay. I understand where that fits in the Bible. That's before Isaiah. Okay, I got it. It's Moses. Moses is here, and then Samson here. Samuel comes after that. Okay, you get the picture in your mind of what's going on, and hopefully that'll help you as you read your Bible some more. Let's close the prayer, and then we'll be done.